All right. Hello, everybody. It's Laura Ellen Christian with AGE-u-cate Training Institute. We are so excited to be with you today. We are going to let everyone who's here roll in for a minute. But our topic today is focusing on innovation in dementia care. So as AGE-u-cate, we took a break of our webinars during the summer. And when we came back this fall, we sent out a survey to everybody. So you might be on here. You might have completed that survey. We appreciate your feedback. And we wanted to honor that feedback that you gave us. So one of our top topics that were voted on was learning more about innovation, what's happening in the space of innovation for dementia. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Our webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sure to send this out to everyone. So welcome. I am so excited to be here with three fabulous industry experts to help me in a conversation on this topic of innovating in dementia care. So I'll introduce them and then let them share a little bit about themselves. But first, we have Dr. Ashlea Smalley from Grace Management. She's the National Director of Memory Care and Life Engagement. Next, we have Doug Pace, who is the Senior Director of Long-Term and Community-Based Care for the Alzheimer's Association. And last but certainly not least is Matt Reiners, who is the Chief Growth Officer for Parasol Alliance. So I will let each of you introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll dig in.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Ashlea Smalley. I am with Grace Management. I've been with them for almost 4 years now, but I have been in senior living really since I was a toddler. So like the last 16 to 20 years, I've been working in senior living. And I joke, but really my mom and dad met in a nursing home because they both worked there. And so I have been around older adults really from the time I was a toddler. And I am very passionate about it. I'm just really excited to be here to have this conversation today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Doug?
Hi, everyone. I'm Doug Pace, Senior Director for Long-Term and Community-Based Care, part of the home office team of the Alzheimer's Association, headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. I work out of our policy office in Washington, D.C., and part of the care and support team, and I work across practice, policy, and research on all things related to long-term and home and community-based services. I've been with the association a little over 9 years. Prior to that, I was with Leading Age for 20 years, 5 years as the state exec in Tennessee, and then 15 years in the Leading Age home office. And I'm a licensed nursing home administrator and ran a community back in Nashville many years ago. Glad to be here today.
Thank you. Matt?
Hello, everyone. As Laura Ellen had mentioned, I am the Chief Growth Officer at Parasol Alliance, coming up on 60 days there. But before then, so Parasol is an IT technology consultant, fully managed service provider. So handling really anything and everything, technology, IT, and really just have a great pulse on the industry of what's happening on that side of things. Before that, I had helped start a company called Eversound that was helping residents to hear better in group programs. And one of the places where we saw a lot of impact was helping those living with dementia. So super excited to be here and join this rock star panel here.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. It is a rockstar panel, so let's get started. Before we dig into conversation, we wanted to kind of set the tone of what is innovation. You know, it's sometimes it becomes a buzzword out there, like a lot of other things that trickle up as buzzwords, and that is definitely one. So innovation, what does it mean to innovate? And so we wanted to throw up a poll. So let me see if I can do that. I'm going to launch this poll, and there's some questions there for you to define what does innovation mean to you. So let me launch that and make your choice there. As I was researching a little bit and we were having conversation coming into this topic of innovation in dementia care, we thought this was really important to start with, is, you know, to really set a ground definition of what are we talking about here, because it can be a lot of things. Sometimes it can be confused with maybe, you know, something else. So I'm going to end the poll here. If everybody gets their answers in, you've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to hit your button. Okay, in the poll. Let's see. I don't do polls often. I'm gonna look here, share results. We'll bring it up with everybody. Is that right? Okay, can you see those? All right, so the results. So the majority of you feel like all of the above. So innovation is using technology, a new idea, the improvement of something. And then we have one person that said something else. So open up your chat. Feel free to use the chat during this webinar for sure. So people are saying solving a problem with a new solution. That's exactly. So I don't know, Julie, if you were on Google and you brought up the Webster definition for innovation, but that really is the Webster definition for innovation. It's solving something with something new, right? So that could be, let me stop sharing these results. It could be solving it with technology. It could be solving it with a new idea, right? Thinking of something in a different way and then bringing it forth in a new light, right? Based on that thinking. And then Barbara, I see you. You're asking us to speak more slowly, and I am going to really try to do that. Harness my southernness and speak more slowly. So thank you for putting that in the chat. So great. The majority of us kind of are in that mindset that innovation can really encompass a lot of different things. So that's fantastic. And we're going to talk about a lot of those different things in this conversation. So we're going to get into technology. We're going to get into innovative care approaches, which could be thinking and solving problems in new and different ways than we've done before. We're going to dip into non-pharmacological interventions. And then we're also going to wrap up with talking about education and training and how that plays into innovation in the field. But to kick us off, I'm going to ask Doug to share with us, kind of set some ground around the updated facts and figures that came out 2024 for the Alzheimer's Association. So Doug, what are the biggest takeaways for folks that are with us today?
Sure. Thanks, Laura Ellen. Well, the Alzheimer's Association Facts and Figures Report is really one of the most important resources that we publish every year. It comes out in about March of each year. And I'll just give you a few highlights from that report. We know now that there's nearly 7 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease. And we know between 2000 and 2021, deaths from heart disease have decreased 6.1%, but deaths from Alzheimer's have increased 141%. And this is an interesting statistic, and this has been in the report for the past couple of years, that 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's or another dementia. Now, let me be clear in saying that doesn't mean that they always die from dementia, but they have that comorbid condition. And we know people with Alzheimer's and other dementias have more comorbidities than those without. And we also know, and one of the things that this report looks at is the cost and how much does it cost us as a country. In 2024, the estimate is that it will cost the nation $360 billion in paid care. But if you add that and look at all of the care that unpaid caregivers are providing, that totals about 11 million Americans. That totals about 18 billion hours a year, and that costs another 347 billion. And as I cost, that's the amount that people are contributing in unpaid care. So if you look at it today in 2024, you can see we're well past $500 billion in what it's costing for this disease between paid care and unpaid care. The other thing that I would just mention is every year we do a special report as part of our Facts and Figures report. And this year it was around mapping a better future for dementia care navigation. And that coincides with GUIDE. And I'm sure most of you are aware of the new GUIDE model from CMMI. And so it really delves into that piece of it. But if you want to download the full report, it's free and downloadable on our website at alz.org/facts. And I encourage you all to take a look at it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like I look and dig into those reports, but every time I hear that statistic that the deaths from Alzheimer's have increased 141%, that's staggering and definitely drives us to this conversation, right? Of gosh, that's telling us we need to do something new. We need to rethink, relook, invent, reinvent, just think about this differently. And I think the guide model is one way that as a nation, we're trying to do that, right? And that's from a national level, and then that trickles down to individuals, companies, organizations that are doing that as well. So again, thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to jump over and just, rip off the Band-Aid of technology, right? So we do think about innovation. Sometimes that floats to the top of our mind. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So Matt, I'm going to invite you to talk a little bit about Parasol Alliance, how you all are supporting the integration of technology to enhance quality of life for people living with dementia. What are you seeing out there? How are you helping people?
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura Ellen. And Doug, blown away by those stats. Appreciate you sharing that. It's such a valuable resource that you're helping to put out into the world. So thank you for doing that. And I'm excited to see the people on this this webinar here just don't think of innovation and say it's technology. I saw that was the one that got 0 votes. So kudos to you guys, because I think a lot of the times, from my experience, when people think about innovation, right, it's this idea of an invention, but it's couldn't be further from the truth. Innovation is really something that generates value for the world, something makes something faster, something better, cheaper, just gives more satisfaction. In terms of like Parasol Alliance, so for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we're really just trying to change the technology culture within senior living. Technology is the future, if not the present. And if anybody that's works in this industry knows that in terms of technology adoption, we're usually not the best or the first people to kind of embrace that. So with Parasol, what we're trying to do is really trying to change that dynamic, help these communities get the tools that they need to be successful in the short, mid, and long term when it comes to technology, whether that's being consultants or actually helping with the IT implementation. And when I think about technology, especially helping those living with dementia, we're really talking about two things. That's personalization and empowerment. When I think about technology too, it's the true promise really lies in its ability to tailor experiences, environments to the individual needs and wants of those residents and empowering those caregivers with more data-driven insights. There's a bunch of different things I can get into of how that's working, but I think we have another question about that. So I'll pass back the mic to you, Laura Allen.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I love you narrowing down on those two topics, right? Of personalization, and empowerment. And I think that's so important. I know as we were preparing for this conversation, we talked a little bit with Ashlea about that in terms of what they're doing at Grace Management. So I'm gonna pop over to that. I'm gonna pop around a little bit. So I apologize to the panel if I'm not going in order. But Ashley, why don't you go ahead and share with us what Grace Management is doing connected to those two topics, personalization and empowerment, because I know that you're going to have some great things to share about what you guys are doing and how you're digging in to elevate quality of life there.
Yeah, thank you so much. So for us, one of the things that we've done is just actually launched updated training really pertaining to those two things. I think it has been a goal of mine really over the last year is to, when we're thinking about how we are equipping our team, is to really center the resident experience. I think that as we get into senior care and specifically dementia care, it's a bunch of really caring people that want to take care of people. But even in having that mindset, you are creating almost like a power dynamic between the person delivering care and the person receiving care. And you feel like as the care provider, you're in charge, right? And so what we're really trying to do with all the training we're breaking down is to like reestablish an equal relationship with residents and associates. So we're using, there's so many good like programs and frameworks out there for approaching memory care. And I have the privilege of borrowing from many of them, right, to create something really cool. Some of the ones that are super accessible would be the Best Friends approach by David Troxell and Virginia Bell, Validation Training Institute with Naomi File, Dr. Cameron Camp's Montessori approach. There's tons of resources out there for those kind of different mindsets. And so we've kind of pulled from a lot of those things to create an updated training program, which we put through the recognition through the Alzheimer's Association to make sure it also meets their criteria. So we've really pushed for that to be able to then personalize and center the resident experience. And so that's been really important through the training piece. And we've also brought in over the last year and a half a different technology platform for our engagement system. We're using LifeLoop, but a lot of them out there can do this, where we are putting in personal information for the residents so that it's quick and easily accessible for the team. And then it's just been able to help us track to who's doing what and like where are we missing things through our life enrichment programming, who's not coming to stuff, and what can we do to reach those specific people. And so then we dig in even further with that personalization. And we do a very extensive social history on everybody, which is very standard for memory care. But how are we then actually bringing that to life in the way that we're engaging our programs? And so those are kind of some of the things that we're doing and using right now.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's, back to that definition of innovation, right? You have the same goals, right, as to help care staff and other team members really transition from a caregiver role to really a partnership, right? And to leverage what we know about people to help you move that partnership from a relationship, right, to really, increasing quality of life. And so leveraging technology to do that, right? Same goal, same thing we're trying to accomplish, but how can we do it in different and new ways with what's out there now? So I'll pop back to you, Matt. I know Ashley mentioned some specific things that Grace Management is leveraging. Any other specific products or resources out there that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different companies doing it, but one of the things we're starting to see more and more companies break into the space is with this idea of sensor-based monitoring systems, right? Whether it's video or audio, or you've even seen the ones that are like kind of picking up motion to sensors that's not necessarily recording video. And these tools are tracking whether it's trying to track falls or just changes in behavior or movement or sleep patterns, and really trying to get this idea of like, and there's that balance between technology and care, right? That I think is so important to call out, because I think, this fear of AI coming over and the Terminator kind of taking place of everything, like there's still such a big human component. But if we can kind of track some of these things and get that data, but I'll get back. So like, yeah, these sensor-based monitoring systems that are tracking this, looking for patterns. And then once people start to break from these patterns, right, that's where we start to see some of these negative things start happening. But in terms of like other innovative tech solutions, I kind of liked the idea of like keeping things simple, right? So one of the simple things that I've seen recently that I'm a big fan of is this, I think if have ever been in a community, you've seen this idea of a shadow box, right? It's usually outside of a resident's room, has pictures of the family or some keepsakes that's important to the individual. One of the things I'm starting to see communities embrace now is this idea of a digital shadow box, right? That's you can get more information into, more pictures. It's more of like a running reel of things that are kind of taking place throughout that. And I think it's just a simple way, from my point of view, in terms of like what that can do and kind of elevate that experience and add more life, more movement to that. I also think too, where we're looking at some of this stuff, especially for helping those living with dementia, I want to shout out my friends at Rendeavor doing some really cool stuff on the VR side, whether it's providing like some of these experiences. Like I've seen the videos of a person with VR on and around them is just golden retriever puppies, which I mean, if I could have one VR experience, I'm pretty sure that would be it for me as well. But they've done some really cool, and I think I love their approach because it's not just these feel good moments, but they're actually tracking some of the outcomes that they're seeing and seeing this positive quality of life improvements. And it's really nice to see some of that taking place. And then when, I think to Dr. Smalley's point, this idea of, what I see, you see this buzzword of AI being thrown out around, when we're doing some of these resident interviews, from the back end, what we're essentially doing is data labeling, right? Is you're looking at a sentence, whether it's a positive, a neutral, or a negative tone, and then what they're talking about. So if someone says, I really enjoy fishing, right? There's a data label of phishing, and then this idea of generative AI, if it's finding those resident profiles, is then able to take that and curate content specific to them. Like I just heard of a group, Zinnia TV, that's able to do this and then create quizzes for people specifically to what they're interested in, right? So there's like all these cool things I think that are coming out. And again, it's going back to the personalization and empowerment side, and with where these technology platforms are going, getting all these massive sets of data, but able to spit out, real world examples and things we want to use. I think that's, what we're going to continue to see as we move throughout this.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of good nuggets in there. Any reactions from the panel, Doug or Ashley, about what Matt shared? Anything you want to add or expand on? I know we dipped into AI, which is another buzzword, kind of machine learning. There's a lot of that out there, and I think Matt kind of started the conversation of it's a lot of it out there, but it's narrowing down, right, to what your goals are and how to leverage those for very specific intentions, right? So technology is only as good as the intention of how you're going to use that product or use that resource. So any thoughts from Ashley or Doug on that?
Well, I'll just give a couple. I think, one of the things, Matt, you talked about is, having these new technologies and other things that really can help the quality of life and quality of care for people with dementia, but then looking at the outcomes and really being able to see what does make a difference. And I think a lot of times, that's the piece that gets left off is we throw a lot of things up and we think it works, but do we really know what works best tailored to the person? So I think, and I know we'll talk more about this later, just the importance of having a dedicated quality improvement process where you're always evaluating what you're doing down to the person level and seeing what really does resonate with them and what makes them have a better day. And then, you talk about artificial intelligence, and, I'm certainly not the expert on that. I mean, Matt can speak to this a lot more than I can, but, I think I saw an article in McKnight's this week that said, we know that artificial intelligence has the promise to do a lot of promising things, but there's a lot of skepticism, especially around seniors. I think this one article said that 74% of middle-aged and senior Americans would not trust a care plan that was generated using artificial intelligence. So, I think we all have a lot of work to do in that area. And I think artificial intelligence is the future. I've just started to dabble into it a little bit, and it's pretty fascinating, on what it can do. And hopefully it can, help us streamline and help us do things better. And, hopefully allow the staff to spend less time charting and scheduling and do more around having more time to spend time with the residents each day. So I'm excited about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I have two super quick thoughts about kind of this part of our conversation. Number one is don't be scared of Chat GPT. I think anybody out there can play with that a little bit. It's completely free. I have life enrichment directors who are using it to help them generate a movie schedule. Because then you don't have to sit and scroll through Netflix and Amazon Prime of what's here. So using it for things like that, help me generate a movie schedule, help me come up with a fun name idea for this party and give it the parameters. And it can help with some of those things where if you get stuck. So I would say everybody just go play with it. Don't be scared of it. It's a very easy toe in the water for playing with AI a little bit. And my second thought with this is because there are so many tech solutions out there, right? Like Matt rattled off 4 or 5, just boom, boom. I think when you are looking at bringing those into your communities, don't be afraid to do a trial period, right? To see if it's going to meet the need that you've identified, right? So don't be afraid to beta test stuff. You don't have to bring it in, and especially if you are in a corporate seat, and roll it out to every single property that you oversee. You can try it at 1 or 2 and work out the kinks. So that then when you're yes, this is the solution that we need, this is amazing. Or if it's, hey, this isn't the solution that we need, and here's why. And so then you can kind of free yourself up to look at other things too, because it's vast, the resources out there for technology and senior living now.
Are you going to say you unmuted yourself, Matt? I'm waiting.
Yeah, I was gonna just kind of piggyback off of Dr. Smalley's point there, because it's funny because I've come from the vendor side where I was that person that was hoping that a group would roll us out to all of their communities, right? Like if I could skip the pilot all day, I was trying to do that just because I knew the impact that it would have and it would work. But now that I'm on the other side of it, like yes, 100%, you should be piloting any of these things, looking for scalability within that. And then I would say too is just like what training programs are you incorporating into that? There was too many times I saw providers just say that they would own the training process for that and not depend on us at all. And they failed every time, right? Like it's just, and to your point about like the training programs and being innovative, right? Like you need someone to own it and really try to do that. But yeah, I would try and pilot anything and really trying to like scale it from there. I mean, they'll go at your pace. You're the client. Like you should tell them how to dictate what you're doing and how you want to go about it. There's definitely some charismatic people out there that will try to convince you otherwise. I thought myself was one of them in the past life. But there's definitely an opportunity to do that. And I think when you're looking at technology or playing around with it, right, you got to make sure that it's going to work and that you're getting what you want. And I find too many times technology companies are out there using these buzzwords like AI, right? Where they might not even have an AI platform. They're using that in their marketing to kind of generate buzz and awareness. And they're really just doing that. And then they're future selling on things that are coming down the pipeline. But, you need to think about what's there today and then work with them and partner with them to try and create some of these better solutions as you move forward.
Great, some great advice and ideas out there. And I'll say, I also am a big proponent of piloting things, especially if you are in a role where you're, overseeing multiple locations or, situations like that. And I'll say, even if, even in a role of like, I would get overwhelmed. I served in a role similar to Ashley, and I would get overwhelmed with so many options, right? Because then you feel the pressure to pick the right one or to make sure you're really vetting all of it. And so I would say through the lens of trying something out, whether it's just figuring out the free chat GPT and how you really want to leverage that for your organization, or really digging into a tech solution and piloting it, this is a great opportunity for you to innovate through the lens of growth for others, right? So really throw it out there to your whole teams. And they're going to be people that are excited to try different things. So, if you're out there feeling overwhelmed, really think about who else is on your team and how can you guys divide and conquer of trying some of these out and then coming together to see how it's working and how it can really be blended, right? Because Ashley talked about that of the training. There's so many different training programs out there. AGE-u-cate is an option. There's the best friends approach, the other options that you talked about that. And it's a beautiful thing when you can take pieces from all of those and blend it together. So that's a great approach as well. So fantastic. Yeah.
The thing I'll add to that, sorry, we get talking about AI,
Yeah.
I get really excited.
Yeah.
But I think to Ashley's point about teaching her team how to use it and be successful with it, right? Like I think when I think of AI in the short term, if you can empower your teams to just like get comfortable in using it, right? Like there's not going to be a technology all-in-one solution that everything is AI, everything's talking together. But if you can teach your team how to use it, like love the idea of the movie list, right? And like there's just other things that you can do to kind of like get stuff from that. Whenever I talk to a programming lead at a conference, I try to like walk them through that and be like, look, this is how you could use it. This is like a free tool. Like teach your teams, like create some guidelines on how to use that. Because if it can save you time from doing some of those more mundane tasks and maximize time being spent with the residents, right? Like that's why we're in this business, is to spend time with the residents, doing cool things for them, giving them awesome experiences, and minimize the time sitting behind a computer screen, right? And so if we can teach that and save some hours per week, I mean, I look at that as a win.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree with that of like our intention, right? What is your intention? And the intention is to free up your time, right? Because we know that the best solution for people living with dementia and all of us is to spend time with each other and to create those quality connections. And you can't replace that. You're never going to be able to replace that, right? But you can leverage these other things to give you more time to do that. So on that note, Doug, I'm gonna ask you to share a little bit with folks about the Dementia Care Providers Roundtable. I know you lead that initiative for the Alzheimer's Association. Can you share a little bit about that and some of the latest innovations or recommendations from that roundtable. I think that fits nicely into what we're talking about here.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the Dementia Care Provider Roundtable brings together thought leaders from across the continuum of long-term care and home and community-based services to advance quality evidence-based dementia care. And so the roundtable funds research, but it also produces white papers and articles in peer-reviewed journals. And everything I'm talking about today you can find on our website, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of the accomplishments of the roundtable. And one of them is not new, but it's still being utilized so much. So during the pandemic, we collaborated with 36 other organizations in developing emergency preparedness guidelines in caring for persons living with dementia in long-term and home and community-based settings. And they're just some great basic tips on providing person-centered care and observing and responding to dementia-related behaviors focused on non-pharmacological approaches and much more. And, I think, we know during COVID that, we had to step back a little bit from some of our person-centeredness because, rightly so, infection control had to rule the day. But we also know that we saw the tragic consequences of the social isolation of many people with dementia that had some tragic consequences as well. We also know that, especially for people in the middle and later stages of these disease, that behavior is a form of communication. And so sometimes, they may be communicating that they're in pain, or maybe they're just hungry or thirsty, or they need to go to the bathroom. So, this is just a great resource, I think, that I would just tell people to check out, utilize, share with your team. One of the things that I also want to mention is, a lot of times we focus on the memory care unit and think, well, if we do that, then we're covering all people that are in our communities. But we know that, if you're in a life plan community and you have independent living, or if you have traditional assisted living, there's a lot of people there with maybe mild cognitive impairment or undiagnosed dementia. And so it's important that not only the frontline staff working there, but really the importance of these basic, what does it mean to provide good dementia care? Everybody in the building should be trained on that. The administrator, the receptionist, dietary, activities, housekeeping. Actually, I think you would agree, a lot of times if you really want to find out what's going on, you go to the housekeeping staff, right? Because they're the ones that are in the room a lot, and they really do have the pulse of what's going on. So again, that's just a great free resource with a lot of tips there. And then in July of this year, the Roundtable had an article published in a peer-reviewed journal called "Empowering a Person-Centered Long-Term Care Workforce." We all know right now, and again, especially after the pandemic, that we have a workforce crisis in many different sectors, but definitely in the long-term care workforce. So this paper really focused on 5 touch points. Number one, talking about the importance of making sure that you have high-quality jobs that are focused on maximizing choice, flexibility, and some self-determination. Making sure that you have recruitment and reputation management. Make sure that you have a great onboarding process. And then really focusing on retention. I know a lot of times we focus too much on turnover and we don't focus as much on retention. And then just what does that training and career advancement paths, are they clearly laid out? So when someone comes to work for you, they know what opportunities they have to advance in the future. So again, that paper, and again, that along with the others, if you go to alz.org/DCPR, you can see all of the research and all of the papers. There's actually a paper around COVID there. There's several other accomplishments. And I think, this last paper really highlighted the fact we talk a lot about person-centered care that's focused on the residents, as it rightly should be, but we also have to have a person-centered care approach around our staff as well. If we're really going to empower our staff and make them feel good about what they're doing, we have to employ some of those person-centered practices to staff just as much as we do to our residents.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that you talk about that. It's so important in dementia care, any care setting, right? But we're talking about dementia care today. And specifically when we talk about how we can leverage innovation, especially coming off of technology and AI conversations, to free up time of people to really, help to elevate the quality of life through that personal connection, that it's so important that we think about how to apply innovation to our people doing the good work every single day. I'll pop over to Ashley. Anything you want to share about how Grace Management is trying to apply that person-centeredness to residents, and to your teams?
Yeah, so I have a colleague, her name's Sarah Moriyama, and she is our National Director of Hospitality and Training. And her whole thing is extending hospitality to associates. And so we have like getting to know you forms for our team members now. We have like recognition tools in place now that we didn't have a couple of years ago, because for me, especially in memory care, your associates are the backbone there, the people on the front lines, and it's a hard job. Like if you've spent any time in a memory care neighborhood, like it can be amazing and rewarding and beautiful, but also just really hard some days. So doing that kind of programming, I think, has been really impactful. For me too, I want my teams to understand like that each of them bring a different strength to the table. Because we've really been extending kind of the life enrichment umbrella to include our associates working in memory care in different capacities, in a care capacity, med tech capacity, and realizing like you have fun strengths and things that you can bring to the table to do with these residents too. Because sometimes with people, if you say run an activity, you get kind of a deer in the headlights of like, what am I supposed to do with a group of people? I don't know. But then you kind of have to like demystify it, and you're like, no, just be a person with people, connect with them, just sit and chat. Like it doesn't have to be complex. But by doing that, instead of just sitting in a room quietly while you're watching people to make sure that they're physically safe, right, which is what a lot of them kind of revert to, you're interacting and really creating a higher quality experience for both yourself and your residents, because it's a lot more fun to interact with your residents and get to know them, if you go to the best friends approach, like a friend, than it is to just sit and watch and make sure that they're not like gonna fall, right? There's a very different kind of quality of work experience. And then the one other thing that I've tried to do is I love leveraging professional resources where I can. And I recognized at a point in time earlier this year that my team was just having a little bit of fatigue with me, being the person who was training, me being the box, right? Like the head in the box on the computer. So I reached out to my network to get other people who would be willing to talk to them about different things, which was so great because they bring a different perspective. They bring a different level of expertise to the team so that we can learn about specific topics that I'm not an expert in. So I think that was really kind of, it was great for me to have like a break from being the presenter, but I think it was also really great for my teams to just hear different perspectives that's not me, but also learning something that really aligns with all of our philosophy for memory care. And I'm happy to return the favor for anybody if you want me to be the break for your team. So happy to do that.
That's fantastic. When I saw you make that shout out on LinkedIn, I thought that was really innovative, right? To think about how do we get past ourselves sometimes. And I think naturally a competitive environment crops up in aging services and each sector within aging services. And so sometimes we have this nature to want to hide what you're doing, to like not let everybody know your secrets so they can't replicate them or whatever. And really, I understand we're all in a business, and you're fighting for the people or the services or things like that, but really that does a disservice, right, to the industry as a whole, and especially the reason that we're all in this, which is the people. So I really love that you really spread out in that way and invited people to come in, invited your own teams to kind of really, create that culture of reaching out beyond your own organization. So I'll ask a question kind of to the panel about that of any encouragement or thoughts around how, as aging services, we can do a better job, whether it's leveraging technology or thinking of other innovative ways to really do a better job at collaborating to move forward. I feel like the guide model, and I know this wasn't part of our conversation really, but I know it's very new in its infancy, but I feel like that is starting to try to do a better job, right? At kind of collaboration within communities, which includes a lot of different aging services sectors. So any other thoughts on how we can continue to innovate through the lens of collaboration within the industry?
Well, Laura, I'll just start because I do think Guide has so much promise. And, this is an 8-year pilot through CMMI. And what this is doing is bringing services earlier into the disease process and allowing people, again, I talked about how much is spent around unpaid care and how much people are really supporting their loved ones through this process. And Guide is just another new product that I think is really going to have some tremendous results over the next few years.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I think so. So our theme for life enrichment within Grace this year is to sparkle and shine. But part of that, I know we like glitter, it's life enrichment, right? But part of that is helping others shine, right? And elevating other people to share their expertise, whether it is a team member on the floor within the contents of memory care, or whether it's on a bigger scale. I think honestly, Matt, this is something that you do very naturally because you're very good at connecting people as resources to one another. But that has been one of my personal goals is oh, if I know somebody who's really good at this specific thing, I want to make sure that I'm pulling in for them to be the expert, or I'm connecting them to somebody else to support that. I have found I'm the member of a couple different chats that happen monthly for people in similar roles. And I've always found that us as individuals, right, outside of entities, maybe from our companies, are so willing to share with one another best practices, ideas, concepts. I was searching out in one of those groups a couple of weeks ago about different training methods for hands-on training, because that's not a strength of mine. I can give you an education PowerPoint and a lecture all the live long day, but coming up with hands-on stuff, that's not a strength of mine. And so I reached out to others for it. So I think getting to know other people in the space is step one. And being open to that collaboration yourself is step two, because I think you will find so many just open-hearted individuals that have these amazing backgrounds and strengths that they bring to the table.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And to kind of sum up Dr. Smalley's thoughts, when I think about collaboration, it's almost like you got to leave your ego at the door, right? You got to admit what you know and what you don't know, and seeking help and guidance from others. And the way that I've kind of looked at life in general is life's an open book test, right? There's other people out there that can help you along your own path. You just need to be brave enough to ask at times. And if you approach life being genuinely curious about how other people are doing things, and being willing to share and willing, and being a sponge, if you sit down with somebody for 60 minutes and try to learn from them, you're not going to walk away with 60 minutes worth of information that's all groundbreaking. But if you walk away with 1 to 2 golden nuggets of that you can incorporate into your own life, that is a successful 60 minutes. And when I think about collaboration, it's how do we all have similar goals, right? Improving quality of life for older adults. And how do we collaborate and share our experiences, our knowledge, our values with one another to ultimately bring that to light?
Mhm. Yeah.
I would just add to that as well. I think, and certainly having that collaborative spirit, and that's what the roundtable does. It brings together providers in this non-competitive format, and it's amazing when they all get together to have this sort of safe space to learn and share from each other. But I think it's also important, and I love that Grace Management's using a get to know me form for their staff. I haven't heard about that before, and I think that's brilliant because again, collaborate with your own teams and find out what people's strengths are. Like you say, maybe for some people it's training, for other people it's that hands-on stuff, and then maybe it's a CNA who really has a strength that you don't know about, and then that's going to make them feel better and make them really celebrate their strengths. So I think having a collaborative approach externally and internally is so important.
Yeah, thank you. Well, on the note of collaboration, I put in the chat for you, all of you that are with us today, put in the chat your ideas or innovative solutions that you are seeing success with out there. So this is definitely a format that you can go ahead and put in the chat and get some of those ideas in addition to the great information and conversation we're having here. I'm going to circle back specifically to non-pharmacological interventions. This is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart that I'm passionate about. AGE-u-cate has 2 programs, one called Compassionate Touch that really fits into this model of non-pharmacological non-pharmacological approaches to care. We also have an arts-based program. It also falls into, and the reason I'm sharing it, it also falls into how to empower other people on your team. So with our program partners, we often hear with both of these programs, when they're rolling them out, it is always inspiring of who floats up to the top to really grab on to these programs. And so, like you said, Doug, often it's the housekeeper or it's the maintenance director or somebody that's not in a role of engagement or connecting in that way that floats to the top to really lead the charge with some of your most innovative or impactful non-pharmacological interventions and how you can really leverage your whole team. So for the whole panel here, anything that you want to share connected to non-pharmacological approaches? I know, Doug, you shared about, behaviors, understanding that that's a form of communication. We like to talk about it through the lens of stress reactions, but that's kind of what we're talking about here is what are those approaches that we can try and we can continue to innovate around before we reach for a pill. Medication has its place for sure, and we're very grateful for modern medicine, but there's also beauty in this non-pharmacological approach. I'll open it up to anyone.
I feel like I have so many things to say about this, so like you might have to cut me off. But I think because Doug said it beautifully. So many times these things that we label as behavior expressions are really just a normal human response to the stimuli as it is perceived by the resident, right? So we have kind of a formal process that we go through anytime there is a behavior expression, especially if it involves an altercation of any kind, whether that's between an associate and a resident, somebody's resisting care, which is probably the most common thing we see, right? But we have a process that we call our behavior expression analysis, so that we dig in and we know that people don't just snap like in a moment, right? There are signs leading up to it before somebody has that kind of catastrophic moment. So part of this process is like teaching our teams to look back and pulling in everybody, right? It's clinical, it's life enrichment, it's the whole gang. But pulling them in to say, how is this person doing earlier in the day? What did yesterday look like for them? Are they not feeling well? Has there been something new introduced into their environment? Like, did somebody come visit today? Like, what could potentially be causing this, right? Like, what was that trigger moment, right, for that resident? And if we can identify that, then we can put in all kinds of things in place to prevent it from happening again, ideally, right? The other part of that is helping my team to define what they're doing for these non-pharmacological, oh my goodness,
It's hard to say.
It's so hard. But what are they actually doing? Because we have buzzwords for this too. Redirection is like my current pet peeve. Because I'm like, what do you mean redirect? How did you do that? What did you do to redirect that person? Because if you don't define it, then the person coming behind you won't know what you did. And it's going to be so different for each person, right? So like for me and probably Matt, if you played some Taylor Swift music when we were in a bad mood, that would probably shift our mood, but that's not going to work for everybody, right? I know Matt is 50. That's not going to work for everybody. So we really need to define like, what is the thing that we did for this individual human being to make them feel better or to prevent this thing from happening again. So important. The other side of this, and this is my last point, I promise, is literally putting yourself in your resident's shoes, sitting where they sat, interacting with a team member the way that you were interacting with them, like physically walk through it to try to understand what their perception was. I've done this multiple times, specifically with falls, of like, I've literally put myself on the floor where a resident was going, how did I get here? What was the process that happened? So I think really putting yourself into your resident's shoes, and part of the AGE-u-cate training that we use is Dementia Live. And it's a really powerful way to do that, to understand what the perception might be if you have age-related conditions plus cognitive impairment on top of it. So I think that's a really, really important piece of it. Put yourself in their shoes.
Well, I'll add as well, one of and it's such an important topic and something that the association is so excited about to so to see where the science and the evidence is taking us with this. So as I think you all know, the association, since really the late 80s, has been publishing what we call our dementia care practice recommendations. And we update those about every 10 years based on where the evidence tells us where things are going. In 2018, I was privileged with my colleague, Dr. Sam Fazio, to do our most recent update. And we worked with 27 researchers over 18 months around 10 topic areas grounded in person-centered care and published those in the Gerontologist. And so these really are the foundation for everything we do in long-term care, whether it be the Dementia Care Provider Roundtable, our Essentials Training and Certification, our Project Echo work, and more. But one of the areas that really has gotten the most attention is where the evidence is growing around utilizing non-pharmacological approaches. And whether that be sensory practices like aromatherapy, massage therapy, pet therapy, or psychosocial practices like validation therapy, reminiscence therapy, music therapy, or even those structured protocols around, mouth care and bathing. We now know that the first line of defense should always be a non-pharmacological approach. Unfortunately, we also know that in nursing homes and assisted living, we have a real overuse of antipsychotic medications. And CMS has really worked on that for many years through the National Partnership to Improve Dementia Care. And they've had a lot of success on the nursing home side, but we have a lot of work still to do on the assisted living side around that as well. And just training our staff to really understand that, to your point, Laura Ellen, a pill is not the best option. Sometimes it is needed, but we also have to do a lot of work in educating our clinical staff. And that's one of the things we talk about. And when we did our dementia care practice recommendations, we actually added two new areas. One is around the importance of detection and diagnosis, and the other one is around medical management and making sure that communities have a good relationship with the physicians and the clinicians and the medical directors to work in partnership with them so they understand that these non-pharmacological approaches really do make a difference. And, we still have a long way to go. I doubt there's very few doctors, if you call them on a Friday afternoon and saying, I'm having a resistant habit episode, they probably don't prescribe bright light therapy, even though we know that might be the best option. Most of the time they're going to call in a prescription. But it's exciting to see how all of this work around non-pharmacological approaches is really taking hold across the country.
Yeah, I think to just build on that a little bit, is looking at the environment, right? That your neighborhood, your memory care space is like looking into that and identifying what about this environment could be frustrating or upsetting for someone who's living there. Is it the noise level? Is it the light level? Right, to Doug's point, we had some communities where we had to completely redo all the lighting because the lighting wasn't great when we came on board, and there were like all these shadowy spaces, and there were a high rate of falls and things like that, and it was directly related to that environmental space. There's so much that you can do to soften that space and really make it home versus a facility where people are working. And again, I think a lot of that goes back to pulling in your team members too and helping them understand, like, you are working in somebody's house here, and so we should behave in a way that's according to that, right? In the way that we interact with that space and with the residents.
Yeah. All right, we're running, close to the end of our hour here. So this has been a fantastic conversation, and I encourage you, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will pause in a second for that. I want to kind of wrap this up through the lens. I'd be remiss if I didn't do that as a training institute, through the lens of education and training. And I think we've talked about this throughout the conversation today. I think as we've talked about new technology or new approaches, we've talked about the importance of training and education. I would add to that, to continue to be in an innovative mindset, you've got to be in a, growth mindset, right? You've got to be investing in lifelong learning. So one thing I will share around innovation and leveraging experiential learning. So actually you talked about, kind of thinking about the hands-on component of things maybe isn't your strong suit, and that's totally fine, right? But it is important. You recognize the importance, right, of weaving that into how you're engaging with people. So I would definitely, if anybody wants to share about that, but we know at AGE-u-cate the power of experiential learning through our Dementia Live program and some other products that we offer. And often that's where we find our joy as leaders of the AGE-u-cate team, is connecting with our program partners to hear, how did this experiential learning program bring about new ideas, bring about innovation? Hearing from them the different ways you can slice and dice and bring back experiential learning processes and components to really help you get into that space, help you think about, let me get into that environment and see what changes I need to make. So there's so much beauty in really getting in and doing, and then let that doing guide you to new solutions and bringing in a lot of people to have those conversations. So before we roll over to questions, anybody have anything that they want to add here?
Well, I'll just add quickly. I think you're absolutely right, and I think the other piece is that, and I mentioned this earlier, and one of the things that we discovered when we were working with the researchers around the practice recommendations, and we had these 10 topic areas, but we found this continuing theme through all of them that was around quality improvement and looking at outcomes. And I think it's so important. You know, we know on the nursing home side, they're mandated through the QAPI process to have a dedicated quality improvement program, but we still know that it's probably not utilized like it should. And in assisted living, the same concept applies, is really thinking we know what works, but then measuring to make sure we know what works and then tweaking that to make it even better. So I think having a cycle of continuous quality improvement around everything we do, including our training and programs, to make sure that we're always giving people what they need at the time when they need it.
Thank you. All right, we do have some questions. We're going to circle back to some of the statistics that you shared in the beginning, Doug. Someone had a question. Do you feel like those statistics are influenced by advances in early detection?
I do think some, but you know, we still have a long way to go around detection and diagnosis. And you know, there is a lot of happening in the research field around that, looking at blood biomarkers, being able to help in that. You know, the research is showing us that they're very effective. But certainly, we know that it's a multifaceted approach for someone to get an accurate diagnosis. And we also know how important that is. You know, with any disease, having that diagnosis is so important. So I do think as we get more and more people diagnosed, then that is going to affect the results in their facts and figures.
Thank you. We also had someone ask if we can share the document that includes recommendations regarding detection and diagnosis. So anything that people shouted out, I know Doug shared a lot of resources on the Alzheimer's Association's website. We'll be sure to include those in the follow-up email. And that answers the last question. Thank you, Matt, for answering that in the chat. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. If you registered, we'll send an email out with links to this webinar recording and a lot of resources that were mentioned, so you can be sure to grab those. I'll also take the chat, because a lot of you have chatted in some of the ideas and things that you're doing out there. So I'll also include that summary so you can have a good place to go back and read all of those if you haven't had time so far. We have one more question in the Q&A for you, Dr. Smalley. So it says, do you see staff training / education / skill development and career advancement as a form of person-centered staff care? You might have already touched on this. In other words, taking training and education beyond the mandatory and expanding to a more individualized approach for training and education for your staff?
So the short answer is yes. The caveat is, but it's in the baby stages. So one of the things that we do, because we're trying to find opportunities for growth, especially for me, for somebody who's, we call them a life enrichment manager for memory care, who's in that role, like what's their next step? And so we actually developed senior level of roles where they operate also as a peer mentor to support other new people into the role. We really also try to promote from within for some of those roles. And then also the other thing that we've just like dipped our toe into start doing is offering the essentials certification. Because our training program is recognized by the Alzheimer's Association, we're able to provide that essentials certification quiz to people. So this is something brand new that we are offering, really not like broad strokes to everybody right out the gate, but for those people who we've identified as leaders in our memory care spaces, on the frontline team, housekeeping team, dining teams, right? So that they can have that additional certification to then hopefully kind of develop them into a trainer or lead type of role, but that hasn't been fully formalized at this point. But that's definitely the direction in which we are thinking for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, we are about to roll over to 3 o'clock on the dot. So I want to honor, there we go, it rolled over. I want to honor everyone's time. Doug, Matt, Ashley, thank you so much for joining us for this really helpful conversation. We're thrilled as a panel that our poll popped up and you guys are on board with, right, a definition of innovation. And through the chat and this conversation, it seems like, wow, we are really collaborating together to move forward for our ultimate intention, which is increasing the quality of life of people that we're care partnering with. So maybe our next webinar, and we've done this webinar before of including the voices of people living with dementia, but I think that would be a really interesting conversation next. To have someone on our panel or a panel of people living with dementia to have the same conversation, because that's important too. So again, thank you all so much. Like we said, we'll send a follow-up email with the recording and other resources that people shared. Any other parting words from the panel?
The only thing I would say in terms of innovation, I think when you're looking at a process, really anything, and you ask the question, why do we do it this way? And the answer is because we've always done it that way. I think that is the worst way to answer that question. And I think, getting out of that mindset of we do it that way because we've always done it that way, that will lead to innovative things to happen.
That's right. That's your sign, right? When you're saying that, it's time to innovate. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.